Yesterday, somebody was saying their children are not interested in Buddhism because they hear from monks that Buddhism only talks about suffering. Everything is suffering. All they hear about is suffering when they go to monasteries, temples. Sometimes this word is a bit narrowly used. The word we translate as suffering is dukkha. And as we chant every day, we're practicing the Buddhist teachings, following the Buddhist teachings for the end of dukkha. And part of that dukkha is certainly mental suffering, physical suffering. But the definition of dukkha is broader than that. And we chanted this morning, Sabbe Sankhara Anicca, Sabbe Sankhara Dukkha. So all conditioned things, all formations are impermanent. All conditioned things are dukkha. Sabbe Dhamma Anatta, all dhammas, all phenomena, physical, mental, are without self, anatta. So then this family is saying the kids want to hear something about happiness. Why doesn't Buddhism talk about happiness? Well, it does talk about happiness, many kinds of happiness. And the happiness, the joy of when faith in the teachings arises in the mind, happiness that comes from practicing generosity, kindness, keeping precepts, living in a virtuous way. The happiness of a peaceful mind when we practice and develop samadhi, and even the happiness of a peaceful mind that arises from insight into the true nature of conditions. Through understanding, we free the mind from greed, anger, delusion. We experience happiness, and Nibbana is considered the highest happiness. Nibbana paramang sukhang. So the Buddha certainly did talk about happiness, but he also put it in perspective in that most of the things we're seeing as happiness and the experiences of happiness we have are temporary, they're anicca, they don't last. And so, in that sense, they're not the best, because they don't last. And when something doesn't last, we often get disappointed and frustrated. And then we have to look for more of the same. And sometimes we can say life is a bit of a treadmill, endlessly trying to find happiness, contentment, and constantly not being able to achieve it. And that's because sabbe sankhara dukkha, all conditioned things are dukkha, and that means not necessarily just that they're suffering, but they don't last. It's in their nature to always decline, degenerate. So that means physical things of this world, nothing stays unchanged, so you can't really rely on anything material or physical. Your body is obvious, one gets older, gets sick, one day it will die. We build things, create things in the world, we observe the beauty of nature, but none of that is staying still, it's always changing. So in that sense it's all dukkha. And mentally, the happiness of this mind that we can experience, the pleasures, the beautiful states of mind, the happiness of the mind, are also of the nature to decline, degenerate, because they're still conditions. Conditioned states of mind arise, pass away. So dukkha has this broad meaning, it pretty much covers everything. So what is not dukkha? Well, all that's left is nibbana, which is why we're practicing for nibbana, where the mind goes beyond or transcends dukkha. Everything else is still dukkha. Even the practice that we're doing, the good things we do in our life, still come under the title dukkha, even if they bring us happiness and joy as we're doing them. Doesn't mean they're wrong, but in the big sense, they're still dukkha. The more practical dukkha that we're dealing with, though, is the stress, the suffering of life. That's our immediate concern. The stresses that come up in our minds, fueled by different forms of greed, anger, delusion. So that's why we talk a lot about it. We're going to the problem, identifying the problem, finding out what the cause is. We know there's a solution, a remedy at the end of dukkha, and then we talk about the practice that leads to the end of the problem, the end of the dukkha. And these are what much of our teachings and our practice is involved with. It's a bit like, say you have a blocked pipe in your house, maybe it's underground and your sinks keep filling up with dirty water, or your toilet doesn't flush down. You get a plumber in, he doesn't stand on the doorstep always talking about, oh, when I fixed your block pipe you'll be so happy, everything's going to be so good for you, and just spend all his day describing how good it's going to be once he's done his job and fixed the pipe. He might say that, oh, don't worry, I'll sort it out, it'll be fine, briefly, but he'll spend more of his time talking about what is the problem. And you say, oh, my sink's blocked, my toilet's blocked. And then you say, oh yeah, you must have got some gunk or something down there, caught in the U-bend or the plumbing or the pipe underground somewhere. But then he'll talk about what he can do. He's got some tools, some equipment to help find a blockage. He's got another tool that helps to unblock that pipe. He might tell you a little bit about what he's going to do. Then he goes off and does it. And at the end of the day, you've got the solution, unblocked pipe, and you're back to convenience with your sewage system. And Buddhism is a bit like that. We tend to talk about the problem and its cause a lot. And that's what you have to look at first in the practice. But it's obviously not what we like or want, because dukkha is dukkha. It's painful, it's not happiness. So sometimes even just to think about it is painful. But this is always because we're not maybe yet fully prepared to look at dukkha and its cause. And this is what we're practicing for, to develop the mindfulness and the insight to address this problem. We're developing the skills, the sense of well-being from keeping precepts, practicing metta, karuna, kindness, compassion. These give us some of that sense of well-being that helps the arising of samadhi, which definitely gives us a sense of peace and well-being as we practice our meditation, so that we can look more carefully at the at the problem and start to apply the solution. Abandoning, letting go of the causes of dukkha. Underlying cause is ignorance, which fuels craving, different forms of unskillful desires, which fuel attachment, clinging in the mind. And this is a process going on all the time. And so dukkha, we constantly keep getting bound up with dukkha, caught up with dukkha. But with mindfulness and insight, well, we're starting to unravel that process. Calming down enough to look, to see clearly what we have to do. And although we like to study and read and analyze the teachings, sometimes that can be very interesting and stimulating, we're aiming in the practice to internalize them, bring the teachings in and just to observe and recognize from our own experience. Actually know dukkha as dukkha, recognize it, know the cause of dukkha as the cause of dukkha, to see greed, anger, delusion for what it is, and then to apply the practice, the mindfulness, the insight, and experience letting go of dukkha and the peace, the happiness that comes from that, whether it's just temporary letting go or maybe permanently letting go of some delusion that we've been holding on to for a long time. So we don't necessarily have to have a lot of information or knowledge. We're just developing that skill to look back at our own body and mind, to cultivate the path, good karma, make good karma and experience the fruits of that, and to stop making bad karma so that we don't have to keep experiencing dukkha. Sometimes Ajahn Chah said, the practice is really as simple as that. Keep making good karma and keep abandoning bad karma. If it's making you suffer, stop. Stop thinking it. Stop doing it. If it's bringing you happiness and peace and insight, do it. Sometimes the practice is as simple as that. This is why we put effort into meditation, even though sometimes we find it's full of dukkha, pain in the body, feelings of tiredness, a restless mind. This is where we're starting to practice observing the problem. And it's our duty, our job to put in the effort to bring up mindfulness. Obviously, to do that, you have to have the faith, so we call that the saddha. It's a faculty of mind. The Buddha used to talk about our practice. It develops, there's 5 main faculties, spiritual faculties we develop as we practice. Saddha, virya, sati, samadhi, panya. Saddha is the faith, the conviction that we can do this. As human beings, we are able to practice, we're able to train our minds to cultivate wholesome, skillful dhammas. We have a faith that the Buddha did it before us, and then the enlightened Sangha have done it, and we're like them, we're human beings, we can also do it. But it's not just blind faith, or just faith for faith's sake. It's balanced by wisdom. So we're putting our faith in skillful means, using the practice skillfully to bring our minds to see the truth and to abandon the causes of suffering. So faith leads on to effort, action, skillful action, good action. Virya, where we put effort, and you might say regular effort, persistent effort into the practice of meditation, Dhamma, keeping the precepts, bringing up mindfulness, letting go of negative mind states, bringing up skillful mind states, bringing up mindfulness, bringing up wisdom through wise reflection. We put effort into that. And sometimes effort is tiring. Just like anything in life, you do a job of work, you expend energy, it tires you out. When we're kids, we often don't like to do work. We always say, oh, I don't like it, it's tiring, it's boring, frustrating. Really, we're all still kids when it comes to the Four Noble Truths. We all have our limit. We practice for a while, we experience some dukkha, and then often we retreat from it. Say, oh, enough, got to go and sleep, or go and distract myself, do something else. But Virya as a spiritual faculty is you're building up persistent effort that you can sustain, you keep going. That comes through practice, training. Little by little the quality of our effort can improve, and the other faculties help. With strong faith, then we keep renewing our energy and our inspiration to practice. With wisdom, we remind ourselves and see the value of what we're doing. Maybe we can see the benefit that's come over the past period of time that we've been practicing. So we know it's good for us even though we're still experiencing some dukkha. And we know, well, this dukkha is still only temporary, and it's dukkha for the ending of dukkha. So even though you sometimes are working with a mind that's not peaceful or full of doubt, we have pain in the body, we feel tired in some periods, we know that's not the end goal of the practice, it's just some of the symptoms and the feelings that we have to deal with on the way. And it becomes food for insight, food for understanding. We can actually turn them into something good. The third spiritual faculty is sati, and that's where our effort is directed to bringing up sati, maintaining sati with buddho, with the breath, until it's more continuous. As it becomes more continuous, samadhi arises, states of calm, stillness. And the Buddha says stillness is the cause for panya, knowledge, knowing, wisdom to arise. We keep putting effort in, we have to trust, that's where we rely on faith. We trust in the wisdom of the Buddha. This path has been used before, so we're treading it, following it. Then we trust in our own experience as we start to see some of the results of letting go, and we feel more calm, more happy inside. We build on that, so our effort and our energy increases. So sati is more sustained, so we experience more samadhi, and with this calm, still mind we can see clearly, so knowledge of what arises. And these five spiritual faculties support each other. You reduce it down to two things, and it's just the stillness of the mind that comes from the presence of mindfulness, and then knowing the way things are. Because when the mind is still, you can see clearly, and you can see sabbe sankhara anicca, all conditioned things are impermanent, body and mind. This physical body is impermanent, it's changing, it doesn't last. Mental states change, they arise, they're triggered and prompted by different causes, they arise, they pass away. Feelings constantly changing. So sometimes we use our stillness to look at different aspects of our body and mind. So we call this satipatthana, the four foundations of mindfulness. So sometimes we're focusing more on the body itself, the nature of the body, observing it to see how it's impermanent, made up of the four elements. Sometimes we're watching the vedana. We focus just on feeling, pleasure, pain. Sometimes the mind itself. There's no one thing all the time. We tend to be observing different aspects of our person, our human being, at different times. They're all correct, but If we're in doubt, where should I start? When I'm contemplating, developing this knowing, where do I start? Well, we start with the body. It's probably why the Buddha put it down first, Kaya, Kada, Sati, Satipatthana. Because it's very obvious. The body is apparent to us, it's here. We can see it, sense it, know it. As you look at the body, remember it, observe it, understand it. But this is through meditation, through the presence of mindful awareness. You're looking at it and seeing it. They call it, as we chanted, it's just a sealed bag of skin. As long as the sealed bag is there, we tend to like the body. We like to look at it, clean it, keep it looking nice. We look at other people's bodies. We like to look at them and we identify with them. According to gender, according to looks, and all kinds of things. It's just a sealed bag of skin. If you to take the skin off, the bag off, it becomes very repulsive. We wouldn't be able to sit here together if we had all taken our skin off when all that's left is flesh and bones and blood and organs. It'd be horrible, just like a morgue. This is what the Buddha was encouraging us to do, sometimes to go beyond the superficial appearance of things, look inside and see the reality. It's not so attractive and it doesn't last. The most beautiful or the most ugly person in the world, these are subjective things anyway. Doesn't matter. We all get old, get sick, one day we die. And we're buried or cremated. Or if you live in parts of the world, they just put you out for the crows and the vultures. The human bodies, that's what happens to them. That's inevitable. We can't avoid that. There's no avoiding of it. So we're becoming familiar with mindfulness of the way this body is. So we're no longer deluded, fascinated by it. We accept the truth. It gets old, it gets sick, it dies. And that's freeing the mind from the causes of dukkha, greed, aversion, delusion based around the body. We're seeing that we don't own this body. We can't control it, make it the way we want. When we focus on feelings, we internalize this quality of knowing, wisdom that's investigating, knowing the experience. And there's not a lot we have to learn or look at. Pleasant feeling, unpleasant feeling, neutral feeling. You keep bringing your attention inwards to notice the feeling that arises with different kinds of sense contact. Sometimes pleasant, sometimes unpleasant. Always the same quality, arising, passing away. It's anicca. These are conditions again, sabbe sankhara anicca. So they say even pleasant feeling is dukkha in the sense it doesn't last. It's not trying to brainwash you to think there is no such thing as pleasure or pleasant feelings in life. There is, and it can be very skillful, and as you practice you experience more refined kinds of pleasure that come from spiritual practice. Opening up your mind to the wholesome dhammas, the skillful dhammas, brings pleasure, pleasant mental states, pleasant feeling. But it's still impermanent, still dukkha in the big picture. It's not nibbana. So when your mind is seeing that with insight, you're saying these pleasant feelings are not any ultimate kind of happiness that I should keep chasing after, holding on to. Because they can't. You can't hold on to them, because then what's impermanent is not self. You can keep creating experiences to have more pleasant feelings, but that never stops. You even find it's harder. You keep experiencing pleasure in one way, it actually gets less and less the more you experience it. We get used to it. So it's hard to sustain levels of pleasure and happiness through our senses. Pain we're always trying to get rid of. It's because it's unpleasant. With mindfulness, we're observing this pain is not us. We're seeing Vedana in the Vedana, or Vedana as Vedana. So pleasant feeling is just pleasant feeling. Painful feeling is just painful feeling. It's not mine or yours. It doesn't belong to anyone. It's a condition that comes up. When there's the right trigger, the right prompts, you get that painful feeling from the body, from the mind. As you direct sati to the feeling, you gain wisdom, insight in this way. You're seeing feeling arises, ceases. What arises and ceases, ultimately you don't want to hang on to and crave for, because it's unreliable, doesn't last. So if you keep practicing satipatthana based on Vedana, well then craving will start to fade from the mind. You get this experience of relinquishment, letting go, disenchantment, and less fascinated, less caught up in it than before. So you get this separation. Ajahn Chah used to talk about the practitioner who's experiencing this, where they're like oil and water in a bottle. The bottle is the world, oil and water are like the mind and the feeling. And the mind with sati and with insight and panya, it knows the feeling, but it's separate from it. It's kind of next to it, but not attached to it. When we're mindful, it's like that, and that's why people can learn to meditate even with painful feelings arising. They can sit longer and they watch the pain, but they don't grasp at it. They don't fall into aversion, negativity. People who are sick can meditate through their sickness, can be with the discomfort, the pain, and maybe not let it affect their mind. It's like oil and water. They're mindful with the conditions of the body, but not grasping and identifying with them as self. And these kind of experiences can only come through practice. It's not something you can do just by reading or talking about it. We have to bring up the mindfulness and then direct it to contemplate feeling. We contemplate body, we contemplate feeling. Even the mind itself, much more difficult, because there's nothing you can grab at that's saying, what's the mind, what shape, size, colour is it? We can't do that. When Ajahn Chah used to talk about practicing mindfulness of the mind, he said we can't do that, so we use similes, analogies. So he'd pick up a spittoon, empty spittoon, he said, this is like the mind. It's not the mind, but it's like the mind. It's an empty vessel, and you can put things in it. The mind is like that. We have mental states, and the mind grabs hold of them, as it were, or brings them in. Through lack of mindfulness, we grasp at those mental states as self. We don't see them as impermanent, we don't see them as dukkha, we don't see that they're not self. So when it's pleasant, we attach to the pleasure, the happiness. When it's unpleasant, we attach to that. Greed, anger, delusion, we attach to as self. We don't see these mental states, if we don't have mindfulness, as not self, as impermanent. There's no separation. On the subtle level, even non-greed, non-anger, non-delusion, we take as self. This is why sometimes even the fruits of our practice, when we experience peaceful states of mind, subtle sense of conceit or self forms. Only Nibbana is completely free from that. But this practice is helping us to get to Nibbana. So it's necessary. It's what the Buddha called a raft, taking you across the ocean of the world of samsara. But when you get to the other side, you don't need the raft, you can leave it. So even the practice of mindfulness, insight, precepts, all the different practices we do, we leave behind. But we need them, they're vital for us to train the mind. And to train the mind to see and know itself, it's a very refined skill. It takes mindfulness, takes effort. Calming the mind, and then looking back at itself and seeing what the contents are. A mental state arises, some greed. Oh, this is greed. But the greed and the mind are not the same thing. And the mindfulness and the insight is showing us that. We look back and we say, oh, there's greed. It's like this, feels like this. The experience is like this. Then it passes away. It may return again, but it arises and ceases. That's its nature. There's the mind, and then there's the mental state, the mood. With Dhamma, it's the most refined of all. Dhamma basically means everything, including Nibbana. So Satipatthana, Dhammanupassana Satipatthana, it covers everything. Everything becomes an object to be known. In brief, you might say it's also seeing the links between objects, how suffering arises, so contemplating, understanding the Four Noble Truths, and seeing how craving gives rise to attachment, gives rise to becoming, gives rise to birth. All founded in ignorance. Ignorance of the Four Noble Truths. Ignorance is the mind without mindfulness, without insight. You're seeing how suffering arises and you know that process. Back and forth to the point where the mind is no longer deluded. The mind knows, grasping at greed, anger, delusion as self, identifying with it, leads to suffering. Absolutely sure of that, so it no longer does it. Knows what to do to end suffering, and develop the path, knows the Eightfold Path, knows the factors of enlightenment. When we establish mindfulness, we contemplate Dhamma, we understand Dhamma, we understand the impermanent nature of things, the unsatisfactory nature, we understand the lack of self in body and mind. This is insight, comes from mindfulness, it gives rise to piti, joy. When we're practicing with mindfulness, one of the results is joy. So it's not that we practice and just have endless suffering, even though sometimes we feel like that. As we practice more, we gain joy, gain happiness from the experience, because we're seeing the way things are and letting go of the causes of suffering. So as the mind is released from some of its suffering, you get joy, you get rapture, you get energy, virya, you get tranquility of body and mind, passaddhi. Ultimately you get upekkha, the highest Dhamma, equanimity towards all conditions, physical, mental. One who's perfected the fourth foundation of mindfulness is an arahant. They know all phenomena, everything in this world is anicca, dukkha, anatta. The mind just sees that, knows that clearly. There's no more delusion. So the mind is in Nibbana, which is everything that the world is not. We call Nibbana the uncreated, the unconditioned, the unborn, free from suffering, free from dukkha. The highest happiness comes about because of the perfection of satipatthana. Body, feelings, mind, mental objects and all dhammas, all phenomena are seen as anicca, dukkha, anatta. So delusion is removed from the mind. This is what we're practicing, and even though it might seem a lot and a big challenge, you just bring your mind back to the present moment and you're seeing what you're doing right now. Are you increasing your bad karma, increasing your greed, your anger, your delusion? Are you reducing it? Are you letting go of greed, anger, delusion? Are you bringing up mindfulness, or are you losing your mindfulness? Are you bringing up insight and contemplating, or are you losing it? You can actually review your practice over time and see, well, am I going in the right direction or not? And obviously, as we practice, we are gaining more peace and happiness from this. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. You can only force yourself to do something so long. If you're miserable and unhappy, you can't do it forever. So those people who progress in their practice are ones who are actually seeing how to let go of the causes of suffering. To go back to the original comparison, they're the ones who are unblocking their sewage pipes. And they start to experience the relief, of a peaceful mind. If it's only temporary, well, it's still a relief. And it's leads you on to want to practice more, experience more of the happiness, the calm that comes through developing the whole path, the dana, the sila, the samadhi, the panya. All aspects of the path are bringing us to this same point, working to bring out a sense of inner peace, well-being, which leads on to rising of mindfulness, clarity, insight. And then we can let go of dukkha and the cause of dukkha. So Ajahn Chah reminded us just to really point our minds, direct our minds to the present moment, to how this body and mind is right now. Because that's where you learn, that's where mindfulness insight arises. You bring your mind back to the breath, and this stills the mind, quietens the mind. As the mind becomes more still, insight arises. You can know the way things are. And once you know the way things are, your mind doesn't get caught up, confused by them. Just know, oh, it's like that. You're feeling some mental stress, restless, doubt, worry. It's just like that. Once you establish mindfulness, you know it's just like that. When you experience the happiness of letting go, oh, it's like that. So little by little you know the way things are, and this helps you to practice more. You don't have to go very far to do this. Just this one body and mind sitting here, this is all you need. So we have a little bit more time in this session. So we can carry on sitting till the sound